Advanced Heroquest, Tobaro's Shame, the Jail of the Usurper, Part 1. Sven Hamnerhelm stowed away his leather-bound lockpick set and pulled on the handle to the jail cell. It gave a slight creak as it moved, but the fact that it did so was the important part. The dwarf slowly pushed the cell door open and silently stepped into the adjacent interrogating room. Upon the nearby table was his hammer, the ancient dwarf shield he'd found under the Van Heelen manse, and the pouches in which he kept his other belongings. It was curious that his captor, Cronthag Hornhelm, had left these here. Perhaps it was simply an oversight. Perhaps it had been to torment him. Or perhaps there was another reason. It mattered not right now. There was only one road left for the dwarf to walk. The champion of chaos would die by Sven's hand, or Sven would die trying. The death of his father must be avenged. Sven affixed his accoutrements, took a firm grip of his weapon, and moved to the door that led to the corridor outside. In this expedition, the only member of the party was the dwarf, Sven Hamnerhelm, mercenary and adventurer, thought dead by his comrades in arms, but very much alive and eager for vengeance. Sven began by the door to his jail cell, having recovered his equipment. There was but one exit, and the dwarf dallied not and made straight for it. The door opened up onto a short corridor, 2 lengths long, that contained a single door on the opposite wall, and ended in a right-hand turn at one end and a T-junction at the other. At the end of the turn, the GM rolled a die. If this die comes up as a 12 or a 1, then they are able to draw a dungeon counter. Unfortunately, they rolled an 8, but just so you're aware, this die was again rolled at the end of each and every exploration turn, although we will only show the successful rolls from here on in. Sven weighed up his options, but noticed that there was a slight movement of the air towards the T-junction. It was, no doubt, imperceptible to most, but as clear to a dwarf as a burning beacon on a hill. It meant that way led to the outside. Sven readied his weapons, ignored the door opposite, and skulked along the corridor towards the T-junction. The T-junction led off to a corridor in either direction, each 2 lengths long, one containing some wandering monsters, and a corner, and the other ending in another T-junction. We flipped our monster card deck to reveal that the monster totaled 2 points, and our GM selected a pair of hobgoblin jailers to represent them. It was then time to roll the surprise roll to see who would place the models. The GM rolled a 2, and Sven's player rolled a 7. This resulted in one hobgoblin being placed in front of the dwarf and the other at the far corner. The GM chose to forego moving them a single square as he was entitled to, and instead, combat was joined immediately. Sven roared with all the pent-up anger that he had kept in check during his incarceration, and brought his hammer down on the nearest hobgoblin, crashing through the creature's flimsy attempt at deflecting the blow. The strike immediately caved in the greenskin's skull and took off all of his wounds. But the 2 criticals that the dwarf had rolled allowed him to continue to pour his wrath onto his opponent, and he struck again and again and again, in all causing 8 wounds, and leaving only a vaguely humanoid-shaped bloody silhouette left on the dungeon floor, and the dwarf dripping in his enemy's blood. But Sven wasn't finished, and continued to move forwards, blood-drunk, towards the remaining hobgoblin. The second hobgoblin saw red, and although the idea of hurling his sulfuric hand grenade at his foe did cross his mind, he instead charged at the bloody dwarf, aiming his slitter knife for Sven's neck. But the dwarf saw his intent and brought up his shield to deflect away the thrust harmlessly. "Oh, no you don't. Let me show you how it's done." And once again, the dwarf adventurer's hammer smashed into his foe as Sven brought it up from below and into the hobgoblin's jaw, breaking it and sending him flying up into the air. But before he could fall away, Sven again struck, smacking the greenskin down onto the floor of the corridor and killing him outright. The sudden spillage of blood seemed to sate something inside of Sven, and before charging off around the dungeon, he felt it was now worth examining his immediate area a little more closely. He began by turning around and heading back to the nearby door he had passed earlier. There was a scent in the air as he tried the handle, but he opened the door anyway, and it opened out into a choking room full of mould. Fortunately, the dwarf knew exactly what to do, and grabbing one of the 4 small flasks of Greek fire that he stowed in one of the pouches at his waist for just such an opportunity, he opened it, flung it into the room, and slammed the door shut, allowing its contents to engulf the room in cleansing fire. With the room clear, he moved inside, intent on searching it for whatever useful items he could find. Perhaps even a secret door out of this jail. To that end, he moved to the far corner of the room. Sven started by searching for treasure, but unbeknownst to the dwarf, there was none. And instead, he accidentally pressed a hidden button secreted behind one of the loose stone bricks. Bagrimnia's beard. When did I become aware it? This allowed the GM to draw a dungeon counter, and he drew out a precious fate counter from the cup. With a curse upon his lips, Sven abandoned any further searches and instead returned to the corridor that led to the T-junction. And then proceeded to the junction itself and faced towards the right-hand corridor, hammer in hand, ready for any more wandering hobgoblin guards. The way ahead opened up to a dead end, but the way behind was a corridor 3 lengths long that ended in a set of stairs out of the jail. However, Sven was dismayed to see a large pair of clearly locked doors barring the way out. And so, with the lock found, it was now time to find a key Sven headed back in the opposite direction, determined to discover its location. At the end of this turn, the GM rolled a d12 as usual. A 1 came up, and he happily drew out a dungeon counter, gleefully seeing that it was a trap. Unaware of this turn of events, Sven marched to the turn ahead of him, only to have the GM immediately spring the trap. Rolling on the trap table, we got a 1, and the flagstone beneath the dwarf gave way. Pitfalls have a spot chance of 5, so are easily identified, and Sven, with his +2 dwarf bonus, easily passed the test. But pitfalls cannot be avoided, making spotting them a moot point. The trap was sprung, and Sven tumbled down into the pit. Fortunately, his natural toughness meant it caused no damage, leaving him only with the tricky task of climbing out of the trap by passing a speed test. To do this, he needed to roll equal to or below his speed characteristic of 5. Normally, very tricky, but true to form, Sven finessed the roll and leapt up out of the pit, the trap having been nothing more than an annoyance. Much to the annoyance of the GM. Ahead, the corridor turned out to be 2 lengths long, ending in a dead end, but contained 2 doors, which the GM placed on either side of the corridor. Sven brushed himself off and immediately moved to the nearest of the 2 doors, put his ears to it, heard nothing, and then barged in. It opened up into a normal room with no other apparent exits. A blood-encrusted, tortured table stood in the centre of the room, next to which was a set of recently employed knives and other assorted torture tools. At this sight, the dwarf had no great desire to linger in the room a moment longer. Instead, Sven moved to the other door. There was the sound of padding feet upon the other side, and he readied his weapons and kicked it open. The door flew open, and Sven found himself looking into a long quest room containing a pair of torture racks, a table, and a large treasure chest in the far corner. However, that was not all, and upon turning over a monster generation card, it was revealed to contain 10 points worth of monsters. The GM selected his monsters, a troll and a hobgoblin, and then he and Sven rolled off for the surprise roll to see who would place them, with Sven narrowly beating the GM's high roll of 10 with an 11. Sven's player placed the hobgoblin near him and the troll at the far end of the room. The GM had the option of moving each one square, but elicited to leave them as was. The dwarf had taken the hobgoblin and his charge by surprise and moved to attack the hobgoblin in front of him. He once more struck decisively and felled the hobgoblin in a single downward smash of his hammer, eliminating all 3 wounds of the jailer before casting the body aside. It was now the remaining troll's turn to act. The dim-witted brute lumbered forwards towards the slayer of his handler and roared. It then swung its moss-covered stone axe at the dwarf, but narrowly missed, crashing it into one of the torture racks adjacent. It was now Sven's turn to attack. He once more swung his hammer in a great arc and brought it smashing into the side of the skull of the overstretched troll, inflicting a pair of wounds and causing it to shake its head in surprise. The troll's turn began with it immediately regenerating a single point of damage, much to Sven's chagrin. It once again swung its axe, but missed, fumbling and getting its weapon entangled in the mechanics of the other torture rack, leaving him unable to free it. Sven did not hesitate and attacked. He struck a critical blow against the troll's stooped skull, allowing him to strike again. Yet another critical, and then strike yet again, in which he scored another hit. It was now time to see if his blows had penetrated beyond the toughness value of 8 of the troll, though. The dice gods were with the dwarf. Sven's hammer bludgeoned the troll over and over and over, and the blood poured thick and fast under the ferocious hammer blows. Bits of cranial skull mixed in with the spilling red vitae. When the bloody mist had settled, the troll was dead, Sven having taken off all 8 of its remaining wounds in an orgy of bloodletting. The room was clear. Sven immediately moved to the treasure chest at the far end of the room, smashed its padlock to pieces, and opened it. It appeared to be empty, but upon closer inspection, Sven saw that there was a map. He grabbed it, unfilled it, and looked over its contents. It was a map of the very jail in which he found himself. But what caught his eye was the tiny picture of a key in one of the rooms. That was Sven's way out, and the note on the map told him exactly who had it. The Chaos Champion, Kromtharg Hornhelm, his father's murderer.